US President Donald Trump has softened his plan to impose punitive tariffs on steel and aluminium imports from America's allies. But duties on $150 billion of Chinese goods, that's retaliation, for what he says are unfair trade practices, are still on the cards. His Treasury Secretary, Mnuchin, is due to visit China on Thursday and Friday for talks. Meanwhile, Argentina, Australia and Brazil are among those that have been granted permanent exemptions after reaching agreements on trade with Washington. Trump has also granted a permanent exemption on steel tariffs for South Korea as part of a revised free trade pact. But Seoul is still subject to levies on aluminium. Trump also postponed imposing tariffs on Canada, Mexico and the European Union until the 1st of June. The German economy minister has called on the US to reduce uncertainty caused by the tariffs.
The crux of this for the Europeans is to stick to WTO rules, that we don't agree to anything not in accordance with the WTO, and that we create security, reliability and predictability as soon as possible for businesses who invest in the US and Germany, who carry out imports and exports. The persistent uncertainty is, for many businesses, a big problem, and that is why I want a good solution as soon as possible.
Kevin Ozebek is in Brussels. He says the reaction across Europe to Trump's decision has been mixed, with the European Commission issuing a particularly firm response.
The reaction here in the EU has been pretty wide-ranging. The UK government says they welcome this news. This is going to give them more time and more opportunities to negotiate. But I think one of the strongest worded statements actually came from right here, the European Commission. This morning, at least in terms of how European Commission statements go, they issued a pretty harshly worded statement saying the U.S. is a very long-standing, a very firm friend and partner. Given this relationship we have, we're not going to negotiate under threats. And not only do we want to make sure that this is going to be a permanent exemption, we also want to make it very clear that the EU is not to blame for flooding the market with cheap metal products. In fact, the EU has its own very steep tariffs against many Chinese metal imports. The EU stance all along has been we should be working with the U.S. to try to combat that, not having our own trade war with the U.S. Even with this decision from the White House, Angela Merkel is still viewed as a very steady hand here in Europe. And this doesn't change at all the fact that Emmanuel Macron has emerged as the most powerful politician here in the EU. And when you brush all the politics aside and you just look at the raw data, you can say and interpret this as essentially being the data in favor of the White House. The U.S. does have a $151 billion trade deficit with the EU, so there is an imbalance there. And one of the reasons why Trump was sent to the White House was to eliminate some of those trade imbalances.